battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization.
The Germans were just the Channel away, and a lot of people didn't realize just how close the war had come and how final the outcome would have been.
The bravest people, and I mean really brave, were the ones who were terrified and went just the same.
So the Germans came again, so we fought them again. No question, no misgivings.
Nothing romantic at all about it. It's a job of work. Don't do it well, you're dead.
We were determined that they weren't going to win. But we didn't really know what we were up against either.
In August 1940, Germany launches the greatest aerial offensive the world has ever seen. Hitler's orders are to destroy the Royal Air Force and force the British people to give in. Outnumbering the RAF 3-1, the Luftwaffe High Command predicts victory within a fortnight.
You think, oh my God, if it's 400 plus, which means anything between 400 and 1,000. You've no idea how, because they're not countable. So you've no idea what's coming. And you know you've got sort of 3.5 squadrons up against them.
I think we all were a little apprehensive. Must have been some people very, very worried, because immediately before we actually entered the Battle of Britain, our CO and one flight commander just walked out. So actually we went into the battle with one flight commander only and a bunch of very young pilots. They just couldn't take it. They just disappeared from the face of the earth. What happened to them, I do not know.
Bob Doe left school when he was 14. A gardener's son, the RAF nearly turned him down due to his lack of education. Aged 19, he is assigned to fly Spitfires with Squadron 234, based at RAF Middle Wallop in Hampshire.
I was 100% convinced that I would be shot down, because I always had the feeling I was the worst pilot in the squadron. I was more scared of calling myself a coward than of anyone else calling me one. And that's really what drove me through. I wasn't fighting the king and country, I was fighting my mum. I just didn't want them over here. I didn't think it was right that they should.
Bob Doe had never fired a shot in anger when, on August the 14th, he is ordered into combat.
We took off on our first scramble and flew in tight formation, which is really stupid, because it means that the only person who's looking around is the leader. Everyone else is spending their time formating. And we proceeded to do everything wrong that we possibly could do wrong. All of a sudden, we found ourselves in the middle of a couple of hundred things with black crosses on. I was so surprised, frankly. We turned and found we'd lost 3 planes. They just disappeared. And at that stage, we all split up all over the place, and I found myself behind a German bomber. And knowing what I thought my shooting skills were, I kept as close as I could and opened fire, and then he just turned over and went down into the sea. And I really felt thrilled, because I hadn't made a fool of myself, which I had expected to do.
The dramas unfolding over southern England are watched avidly. Every day the newspapers and radio keep score as the RAF and Luftwaffe fight for control of the skies.
Tally-ho! There they are, Jerry's. There's a stream of lead from the guns, and he's got him. That's one down.
In a way, I think children thought it was all rather an adventurous game. We're really not so concerned about our safety. We were more concerned with the thrills.
Bess Walder lives in North London. Her father fought in the First World War. Now Bess dreams of joining the Royal Navy and going to sea.
Children and teachers leave at once for their trench shelters in the playing field. It takes much more than an air raid siren to worry the children.
War had become part of our daily lives. We learnt how to distinguish the sound of the Luftwaffe from the sound of the British aircraft that were flying.
One could tell what sort of plane it was. Dorniers had a special noise.
They went brum, 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 whereas our aircraft had a much more continuous sound.
I could reasonably accurately identify the puzzles in the aeroplane spotter as silhouettes. They used to give snippets of planes and you had to put a name to that plane. So I can remember the Spitfires, the Hurricanes, the Tiger Moths, and to me that was really extremely interesting. We had thousands of cigarette cards on air raid precautions, ships, aeroplanes, and collected those, and I read those avidly.
For boys like 10-year-old Alan Francis, fighter pilots become idols.
Our heroes were ace flyers, the Douglas Barders, Sailor Milan and Cat's Eyes Cunningham. I recall eating a lot of carrots, having been told and fallen for it, that Cat's Eyes Cunningham was an expert night fighter, and he ate a lot of carrots. Of course, it wasn't until after the war that one read that that was to hide the secret of the radar. Who that fooled, I don't know, but it certainly fooled me.
From the first days of the Battle of Britain, radar is the main advantage the RAF holds. It gives them early warning of German attacks. But with many more planes than the RAF, Luftwaffe bombers still frequently reach their targets, Britain's fighter bases.
We knew we were getting short of squadrons and pilots, but we didn't doubt that they would do it. The pilots were protecting our country, all our people, everybody. And so everybody was going to, and that included the civilians, going to fight right to the bitter end, killed or be killed, in fact.
21-year-old volunteer Edith Heap is on her way to work at the operations room of RAF Debden, near Cambridge, when warning comes of an enemy attack.
8 o'clock in the morning, the sirens went. So we just set off and ran like the clappers to the ops room and just got in before the door shut. And then it started. Great enormous bangs everywhere. A terrible noise, and we just plotted through that, you know, because that's what we were there for. One girl, who was a silly little girl anyway, started to get hysterics, and she was comforted, and that was the only one in all the time I was there that ever did that. And it's a matter of half a minute, 2 minutes, something like that, because they're gone. They're across and gone. And so that's it. You probably don't have time to register the terror, I think. That's the whole answer. Because afterwards you think, oh my God, you know, and I'm still here. You had the fire engines and the ambulances screaming all over the aerodrome as well. It's quite chaotic. People were very stoical about it. Everybody set about putting it right and getting, as long as they could get the aircraft back in and serviced and off again, that was all that mattered, and that was what was done.
Thousands of civilians are mobilized to help repair damaged planes and patch up the battered fighter bases. As the RAF struggle to stay in the battle, people in southern England fear their homes will be the next target.
The immediate war caused quite a sensation in the school because we all had to take home a letter from the school authorities to say did we wish to be evacuated? And it was a decision for the parents to take. One option was to go to Canada for the war, and I'll recall the discussion at home. Were my brother and I to be sent to Canada for the duration of the war, and the decision, thank goodness, was no, we won't. We'll see it out.
One morning, my mother said, "How would you two like to go to Canada?" Well, she nearly dropped the teapot because we both stood up and threw our hands up in the air and said, "When can we go?"
In the school, what caused the main sensation was the fact that of our school, 6 went to Canada. Because hundreds of children went from all the schools. It must have been all the same across London. That the ship was torpedoed, and there were these, in our school, 6 vacant desks. In our class, there was a Bruce Hilliard and a Henry Smulovich, my mates, who were no longer there. And that really hit home to us that there was going to be big trouble.
We met the train at Euston Station. It was like a scene from an Italian opera in many ways, so highly charged emotionally. The parents hugging their children, children crying. My mother looked at me and said, "Grow up to be a good girl." And I thought, funny? Why is she saying that? My father said to me, "Look after that young man," meaning my brother. And I said, yes, I would. And I was a bit puzzled. Why? Why did she say, "Grow up to be a good girl"? And I realized then that they thought that maybe they would never see us again. We could hardly wait. And the thoughts of Canada filled us with, oh, great joy. I was only, 15, just 15, and I imagined that Canada was right next door to America, and America had all the studios and the film stars. And my brother, of course, imagined that he was going to the land of the Wild West, where there were cowboys and Indians. He was 9.
Within 5 days of their first attacks on British fighter bases, the Luftwaffe has destroyed over 140 RAF planes.
We'd been knocked about. We'd lost a lot of pilots, and half a dozen new ones were posted in. They'd done on average 6 hours flying in Spitfires. How could they cope? And if you can imagine them sitting there, we had no spare airplane, so you couldn't spare an airplane for them to do any practicing. And they'd see us take off 8 pilots and 7 of them come back. 7 pilots take off, 6 come back. How did they feel? I think they had a worse time than I ever had.
When we lost crews, for instance, we had what amounted to a wake, I suppose. We used to go either to the local pub or the mess and drink to them. It was odd, quite peculiar, because it had an atmosphere of its own, that. Nobody said anything, but that's what you were doing. You were actually drinking to them. And the civilians didn't understand that.
From among the pilots who survive, heroes emerge. They're picked out for special treatment by the nation's leaders. One of those honoured by the King is a colleague of Edith Heap.
Well, there was the famous Dickie Lee. He was a fantastic pilot. We heard that he was going to give an exhibition, and he got into his aircraft and he just made it. I've never seen flying like it in my life before or since. He had it inverted before you would have thought it was possible. And he just did the most fantastic show. They were standing there open-mouthed, much to our great delight, watching it. And when he came back, he actually had a swathe of grass around his aerial. They couldn't believe their eyes, and then he got out, helped out because he was still lame, and hobbled off as though it was just quite an ordinary thing to do, you know. He was really a super pilot.
Every effort is made to promote the prowess of RAF pilots, especially to journalists from abroad. Among them is 26-year-old American Whitelaw Reid, working for the New York Herald Tribune, which has opposed the United States entering the war.
I think I was mostly reporting on what I had seen, and I tried to develop sympathy, of course, for the fight that was being carried on, but I don't think I got into the area of recommending that we go to war. You wouldn't have a very good audience probably at that time if you had been advocating war. So the best bet, I think, was to describe the English in their finest hour, which Churchill termed it. Really was their finest hour, I think.
But many powerful Americans believe Britain's defeat is imminent. Prime Minister Winston Churchill sets about changing their minds. He invites reporters like Whitelaw Reid to lunch at Downing Street.
It was great to see how he remained at the center of things. There were not very many people there at lunch. Mrs. Churchill and Mary. Churchill didn't talk too much at the time, but afterwards he was really generous in what he had to say about the Herald Tribune. It's exciting to be a small cog in the process of reporting on what was going on and helping to turn the tide just a little bit maybe in favor of America coming to the rescue at the end.
15-year-old Bess Walder's dreams are about to come true. She is going to sea, to cross the Atlantic with her brother. They set off from Liverpool, bound for Canada.
When we were taken to the docks, first thing the next morning, there was this magnificent ship lying in the harbour. And as we walked up the gangplank, the most amazing sight met our eyes. It was a floating palace.
90 children and a few adult escorts set sail on a cruise liner, the city of Benares, for the 12-day journey.
And so we sailed out into Liverpool Bay, and we heard the sounds of children singing all the way along, because we all stood on the deck and sang, "Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye."
Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye.
And it was a lovely sound. And all the ships in the harbour honked. And as we sailed off towards the coast of Ireland, we felt nothing but pleasure.
Give me a smile I can keep all the while in my heart while I'm away.
Churchill is desperate for America to declare her support for the British cause. He cables President Roosevelt, offering to hand over British military bases in return for a fleet of old destroyers to strengthen the Royal Navy. Whitelaw Reid's newspaper urges the president to act.
Well, we were hoping, of course, that the deal would go through, the destroyer deal, and the Tribune had been supportive of that idea, but it was a difficult political situation that had to be manipulated very carefully by Roosevelt at the time.
The presidential election is just 3 months away. If Roosevelt agrees to send the destroyers, he could lose the votes of millions of Americans who are determined not to be drawn into a foreign war. But the war is getting closer to America. Every day, convoys of merchant ships make the dangerous transatlantic crossing. The Royal Navy is running short of destroyers to escort them, and German submarines are striking with increasing success.
The cabins were on the deck, just above a row of bathrooms which were set aside for the children. And boys were on one side of the ship, the girls were on the other. So my father's instructions to look after that young man didn't get very far, because I really had no idea what he was getting up to, which was probably just as well. This was a new world for us. There was a wonderful playroom for the little ones, because there were some children as young as 4 on board. There was a beautiful rocking horse that we could see from the outside. This beautiful rocking horse had 2 baskets, one each side, like huge panniers, that took 3 children, you see, one riding the horse and 2 children sitting in the baskets. Having come from wartime Britain, the sight of the food at all meals was just unbelievable. I was very fond of ham. Here we had York ham in rolls, and what impressed me most was the fact that the ham hung over the edges. Anything we wanted, we got. We were in 7th heaven. We felt as if we'd stepped into the Arabian Nights.
On the morning of August the 18th, the Luftwaffe launches its largest attack yet on British fighter bases. RAF commanders throw every available fighter into the air.
We weren't practicing any longer. We reckoned we knew it all. We were just waiting for them.
At 20 years old, Hurricane pilot Ken Lee is a veteran. Known as Hawkeye by his colleagues, he has already shot down 7 enemy planes.
You could climb up to 5,000 or 8,000 feet and be in an engagement and be back on the ground in 25 minutes. Refueled and rearmed and off again within the hour.
I was keen to get up and get at them, as it were, and increase my score if I could.
Tally ho is that when you've actually seen them and you don't need the ground control to tell you any further. Now you've got them in the eyeball.
I was a great believer in going straight in bald-headed, take the shortest route possible to him. This didn't give him time to think what he was going to do.
While Spitfires take on the fighters that escort German bomber squadrons, Hurricanes attempt to strike at the bombers themselves. Their best chance is to get enough height to dive out of the sun.
We climbed up and up and up and up, 17,000 feet. We were struggling for height all the time, forcing and pushing it on your throttle to try and get the aircraft to catch up and get within range.
You fly the plane through the gun sight. You don't consider what you're doing. You just throw it around. What happens to the plane is incidental.
You've only got about 30 seconds of firing. You can put a little burst there to begin with to liven them up or distract the rear gunners.
You've got 8 guns firing something like 1,200 rounds a minute. And there's a lot of bullets in 2 seconds.
And as we were climbing up, through a little break in the cloud, saw about 40 or 50 Heinkels.
And there's a whole load of Ju-88s. maybe get in the middle of them, and I managed to damage one. I was shooting him from the side, and his tail blew off.
And the first thing I knew, there was a bang, and my leg shot up in the air. The bullet hit me in the back of the leg. And immediately there was smoke and flames coming out from underneath the main tank. My boot was sogging like your Wellington you've got wet in the stream with the blood from the swoon.
People started coming out and pulling their parachutes. The last one out pulled his parachute too soon. It caught fire, and I saw this parachute burning away as they went down.
Now it's without control and with smoke and flame, so this time I rolled it on its back and pushed the stick forward and did my belt. And I didn't unplug my oxygen, so that nearly pulled me back in again. Well, I fell out. We weren't trained in the use of parachutes. I'd only heard the night before about the theory that you 6 seconds for 1,000 feet. So I did my minute on my stopwatch. There'd been rumours that the Germans were shooting down people in parachutes, and I didn't intend to be hung up there waiting to be shot. So I dropped down to about 5,000 feet. I was going round and round and round, head over heels and tumbling around. When I pulled the chute, it came up between my legs, and I could well have got wrapped up in it like a parcel. And then, of course, I came wafting down in a cornfield, and an old chap jumps out from the corn with a military cap on and a gun, which apparently he'd captured in Gallipoli himself from the Turks. I wasn't in uniform. I was just in shirt sleeves, no means of sort of identifying myself. So he held me at gunpoint until the London Irish arrived and took me off to the local golf club for a refresher.
By the end of the day, RAF bases have suffered extensive damage, but none have been closed. The RAF have shot down 69 German planes at the cost of 51 of their own fighters. August the 18th becomes known as the hardest day.
It was the most exciting battle I think you could wish to hear, because that's all we could do was hear it. But they were falling out of the sky all over the place. It was really exciting. It was a bittersweet kind of day because we lost quite a few pilots. Some came back and some didn't.
Several of the pilots Edith Heath helped guide into battle that day don't make it back. Among them is fighter ace Dickie Lee.
He set off after 2 ME-109s, I think they were, across the channel, and he hadn't enough petrol. And we knew he hadn't enough petrol. And he just disappeared, obviously, into the sea. And I think he just didn't care. And he was determined to fly into them if necessary, collide and knock them down, because that was done more than once, not always by accident. They were going to get them, whatever, even if it means your life.
3 days after leaving home, the children on board the City of Benares receive warning of a storm ahead.
The weather deteriorated very fast. The captain said, "There is a gale, stay below." And in fact, the gale blew up into a gale force 8. Nobody who has not been on board a ship in the North Atlantic in gales probably hasn't much idea of how ferocious it can be. So we were quite happy to stay below. Just when everyone was fast asleep, there came the most terrible explosion. The whole boat shuddered. The lights went out. Someone, I don't know who, came along, took me by the hand and said, "Come on with me." and led me up onto the boat deck, where the scene that met our eyes was one of total chaos. To start with, the boat deck was now at this position because the ship was sinking. The davits that hung down from the lifeboat harness, they were being let down at the same angle as the ship was sinking. So they were swinging wildly. And the boats themselves were rocking. So getting into the boats was a miracle. I was picked up bodily and flung into the lifeboat. Most of the children did not get into lifeboats. Some children jumped and were picked up by men on rafts. But sometimes it was impossible to retrieve the children. I had been told by my father, as you know, that I had to look after my brother. I assumed, because I'd seen so many children fail to get into lifeboats, that he had failed. By this time, the ship was sinking fast, and a lot of the boats were wrecked by this downswell that was caused by the sinking ship. We were slap bang in the middle of the Atlantic, in a lifeboat, grossly overcrowded. It was rocking violently from side to side, and we were pulling away when the lifeboat, as we knew it would, turned upside down. It was like going down a vast, green, shiny, watery tunnel. And then I did, in fact, feel myself coming up. And as I came up, incredibly, I had come up close to the upturned lifeboat. And I stretched out, and my hands clutched onto the key. And across from me, on the other side of the hull, was another young girl about my age. Her name was Beth. The waves seemed like mountains. I suddenly saw that wonderful rocking horse that came from the children's nursery, rocking up and down on those waves.
Throughout late August, Luftwaffe bomber squadrons keep coming. RAF pilots, despite their inferior numbers, remain defiant.
We knew we were holding, let's put it that way. We knew we were taking the bombing and that we were coping with it. There's no sense of defeat at all.
An intense routine of daily sorties against the enemy has taught British pilots that the faster, more nimble Spitfire can outmaneuver German fighters.
The Spitfire became part of you. It was a most beautiful creature. I know, I fell a bit in love with it. I used the throttle open very gently, and all of a sudden this tremendous power suddenly seemed to go through the airplane. And it was the most wonderful feeling. You were part of the air. You were a bird in the air. You didn't have to think about turning. You did turn. It just automatically went. You weren't sitting in an airplane. You were part of the airplane. It was a dream.
In the heat of battle, some young pilots like Bob Doe surprise even themselves.
It's just a question of ego, I suppose. You reckoned you were doing all right, thank you very much. And your ground crew started taking a pride in you too. It wasn't until you got about 5 or 6 shot down that you suddenly found the ground crews are painting little swastikas on the side of your aeroplane. And this was rather nice. First time in my life when I began to realise that people were looking at me and grateful for something that I'd done. I was a very big fan of Biggles when I was a child. John's stories of Biggles. I used to read a lot of those. And I remember that when you got 5 kills, you became an ace. And I thought, good God, I'm an ace. I never said anything about it. But I felt very chuffed, and I had a private celebration. I had a pint of beer before I went to bed.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
Churchill pays homage to the courage of RAF pilots. His speech is broadcast around the world.
All our hearts go out to the fighter pilots, whose brilliant actions we see with our own eyes day after day. I hope, indeed I pray, that we shall not...
In Washington, his words no longer fall on deaf ears. President Roosevelt finally acts, pressing Congress to accept Churchill's request for American destroyers.
It was quite a bitter debate, and all the isolationist types didn't want to have it happen because they thought it might lead us further into war, of course. But I think a number of leading politicians in the U.S. on both sides, Democrat and Republican, supported it, and so the day was carried.
Finally, Churchill has the deal he's been waiting for, a clear signal that America will support the British war effort. The news is eagerly announced in London.
The government of the United States, in return for the grant of certain bases in British possessions in the Western Hemisphere, will turn over to the Royal Navy 50 American destroyers to be delivered ready for immediate use.
In the North Atlantic, convoys desperately need this help. They are so vulnerable to submarine attacks, captains are ordered never to stop, even when one of their number sinks. Survivors like Bess Walder are routinely left behind.
We had gone past the stage of feeling pain. Our faces were swollen, our tongues were enormous, could hardly see, our eyes were beginning to close, and we were very near death. I wished to return to my parents to explain what had happened and how it was that my brother was no longer alive. That's what drove me. And I said through my swollen lips to Beth, "We'll hang on." And she said, "Yes." It's sheer animal instincts to survive. Because there was 2 of us, we were, if you like, inextricably linked. We'd gone that far, we were not in the business of giving in.
The Battle of Britain is in the balance. Even the most experienced pilots are now feeling the strain of daily sorties.
I mean, damn it, we were on duty on the airfield from half an hour before first flight until half an hour after last flight. And in the middle of summer, that's a long time. So we spent an awful lot of time asleep. Luckily, we had someone to wake us up, a batman, and we'd wander down to the mess, fall down to the mess, where they'd serve you with lots of toast, a thing they called butter. I don't know what it was, it was like axle grease, really.
Everybody on the camp was tired. It didn't matter if you were a cook or what you were tired. On the long watch, we used to get 20 minutes off in the middle of it, and everybody used to fall asleep on everybody else's shoulder, sitting round a stinking oil stove. It was amazing that they managed to fight the way they did, because they must have been suffering from awful exhaustion.
I think it's a combination of short and broken periods of sleep and tension. The two together became very tiring.
The weather was still as bad as ever. Clouds were scudding across the sky, gathering ready for nightfall. And then suddenly, and quite unaccountably, I saw something moving on the horizon. And this spot grew larger and larger and larger until the shape became that of one of His Majesty's destroyers, steaming towards us, being battered by the waves, going as fast as any ship could possibly go.
Detached from another convoy, HMS Hurricane has been given exceptional orders: search for the children from the city of Benares. Having spent all day looking, the crew is on the point of giving up.
We were too close to death to make any kind of move. We watched a lifeboat being lowered, and the men inside it were cheering and shouting and saying, "Hang on, hang on. We're coming." We could hear noises coming from the destroyer, and it sounded like a rugby crowd. There were the men cheering and shouting. The coxswain of the lifeboat stretched his hands out and said to me, "Come on, darling, let go." Do you know, I couldn't. I couldn't let go. My hands were stuck tight. And he forced my fingers back, away from the keel, and took me bodily, put me into the lifeboat. And there we were, rescued, just in the nick of time.
The Luftwaffe continues to bombard British bases, in the belief that the RAF is down to its last few hundred planes. But they are mistaken. Britain is now producing twice as many fighters as Germany, and pilots like Bob Doe have grown in confidence.
Excitement. You knew this was it. Right at the beginning, I said it was fear. But after a few trips and I realised that I was coping with it, it became excitement and eager to get out.
And it made people grow up quickly as well. And all right, 1920, they're very young, but they soon became men. You could visibly see that happen. Because when you're going up and dicing with death every 5 minutes, you're going to lose that youth, aren't you?
Well, in 2 months, I went from being an immature and rather scared young boy to being a fully grown and very competent fighter pilot.
After 20 hours in the water, Bess Walder is confined to her sickbed on HMS Hurricane. She is unaware that just 7 children out of 90 have survived the sinking of the city of Benares.
When we got on board the destroyer, we were looked after like princesses. Nothing was too good for us. We were housed in the officers' cabins while they had to sleep in the mess. The surgeon lieutenant said to me, "Come on, Bess, get better quickly." And I said, "It's a bit difficult, because I'm just thinking now of what to say to my parents." And he said, "Don't worry." He said, "They'll be so pleased to have you." He said, "Some mummies and daddies won't have anyone." And the day after that, the captain banged on the cabin door and shouted to me, "Sit up, miss." So because you always did what the captain said, you sat up. And I did. He said, "I've got a present for you." And from behind his back, he produced my brother. My brother had been rescued some time before me. And there he was saying to me, "What are you doing lying there?" And just like a very cross mother, I said, "Where have you been?" And then, of course, we had a big hug and kisses, which disgusted him.
Bess Walder and her brother return to a country that is threatened as never before. Deprived of immediate victory by RAF fighter squadrons, Hitler has changed tactics. British air bases are no longer the only target. Now the Luftwaffe are ordered to bomb the British people in their cities and in their homes. On the afternoon of September the 7th, Hitler's Air Force begins its assault on London. 900 German aircraft reach the city almost unopposed. Their target is the biggest commercial centre in the world, the London docks.
It was on the Saturday afternoon. The planes come over and they bombed and bombed and bombed it. When it started to getting dark, all you could see over down Surrey Docks way, I don't know if you know it, was all a big red glow. We didn't know where to go. There was no shelters provided, none, no shelters provided. My dad said, "We'll go under Abbey Street Arch." And we went under the arch and we sat on the pavement. All the wet was coming down the wall. And I remember one woman, Mrs. Parr, she's an old neighbour of ours, and I laugh about in there. She prayed to Hail Mary all night. I said, "Oh, Mrs. Parr, for goodness sake." She started doing a Hail Mary. Well, that's what they believe in, isn't it? But other people, they just sat there. I don't think we slept the first couple of nights under there. I can't see how we could have slept. It was so noisy.
Hitler is convinced that once the British people see their capital city in flames, they will lose the will to resist. No one knows if he is right. Never before has the population of a major city faced round-the-clock bombing. London's emergency services are overwhelmed. Firemen are called in from all over the country. Ted Wilson, a 16-year-old volunteer from Coventry, must ask for permission to travel south.
I went and asked Mother, and she says, "Oh, go on. And while I was getting into my uniform, my mother, she made a great big pile of I'll never forget it. Great big pile of sandwiches for us to eat on the way. And there was only lard, pure lard sandwiches with a little sprinkle of salt on. And away I went. And I said to somebody, where are we going to? And they did say, we're going down to Silvertown on the docks in London.
In fighting the fires, 16 firemen were killed, 11 by high explosive bombs and 5 by falling walls.
It was horrific. You've got the bombs dropping down, sometimes in the fires that you're actually trying to put out. And the sky didn't exist. That was a blackness. I've seen walls fall down and firemen being trapped. I saw the policeman die, and you could hear the shrapnel, not from the bombs, but from the shells bursting up above and sprinkling down just like rain. There's no doorway or alleyway for a fireman to go into. He has to stand there and take what's coming down.
EastEnders seek refuge anywhere with solid walls. In Bermondsey, an old billiard hall becomes an emergency shelter.
And there was a little bit of music there. And of course, all the young people wanted to go there, didn't they? And I said to my mum and dad, instead of going to Butler's Wharf, let's go in the billiard hall. We tried to get in the billiard hall, but it was full up. And all the people in the billiard hall was all the girls I went to school with, all my age, 18, Lily's friends and all that. And when we come out, the bomb had fallen through in the billiard hall and exploded inside and blew all to pieces. I mean, they didn't even bury the people, they couldn't even sort them out. They couldn't. Shocking. I don't know if it was Lily Williams or Rosie Williams. She got killed, and girl Bat and another girl, all young people, 17 and 18. People were dying all over the place, oh.
In the first 4 days of what's become known as the Blitz, 1,500 people die. Nazi bombers dominate the skies. The RAF makes little impression.
We just did our damnedest to stop them getting there, but we couldn't stop them completely. On those first 2 London raids, we'd taken off quite late and we tended to be underneath the raid. We hadn't got to altitude, let's put it this way, before they arrived. So we were fighting at a disadvantage. We were fighting uphill instead of down. And the 3rd London raid, I climbed like stink from when I took off, and I managed to get above them. And that occasion I got a bomb on quite happily. But the poor Londoners, I really felt sorry for them.
Bombs are also falling on the centre of government.
There was a terrific air raid one night, and Churchill had been giving a dinner party, and he thought about Mrs. Landemar, his cook, in the kitchen. Well, the kitchens at number 10 had these vast windows, and he went into the kitchen and insisted that Mrs. Landemar and the assistant cook come into the shelter with us, which was just as well, because the next morning that whole kitchen was covered in shattered glass. They would have been killed easily.
The atmosphere inside number 10 is bleak. Some of Churchill's ministers fear that Hitler may be right, that Londoners will break under the strain.
We went about our business sort of rather numbed inside, not recognizing the danger, trying not to recognize it. We certainly felt in our hearts that we were going to be reduced to rubble. We felt this is it.
While Hitler's air force batters London, his submarines intensify their attacks on British merchant ships in the North Atlantic. They are essential to Britain's survival, carrying half of the nation's food and raw materials. The Royal Navy herds ships together into convoys and tries to protect them.
It was a complete cock-up, most of it, you know. We brought the convoys through, but more by luck than judgment, if you know what I mean. The German captains were red hot. They knew exactly what they were doing, and our people didn't. We hadn't got a strategy to take on U-boats.
Ian Nethercott is already a veteran. 4 months ago, his destroyer was sunk at Dunkirk, and he was shot by a German fighter plane. He is 19 years old.
At that time, we could only have about 4 or 5 escorts to a convoy of 40 ships. Sometimes in the night, there'd be an almighty bang in the middle of the convoy. You'd see lights and flares and things going off, but you ploughed on. The convoys always kept going. I used to imagine every night when I turned in my bunk, a torpedo slams into me now, I'm already trapped down below. There's no way I can get out from here. I'll just stay there and go down in my bunk. And in the morning, you'd make a count, you know, and there might be 1 missing or 2 missing, you know. And you couldn't pick up people often, and the seas were so rough, and if they weren't in boats or anything, if they were just in the water, you just had to leave them. If you got an ASDIC ping and they were right over the top of it, you still went in and dropped your jet charges right amongst them and blew them all to pieces. And there was 1 or 2 occasions where these poor buggers, you know, thought that they were going to be picked up and they were all waving, and the ship just ploughed on straight through them and fired their charges. And, you know, you killed all your own blokes. You've got to sacrifice some for the good of the lot, you know. And they knew it, you know, if you swept past them. I remember there was 2 or 3 of these blokes and we were speeding up to get in with the convoy, and we had to leave them in the middle of the Atlantic. They got life belts on, but they were going to die. And this bloke realised it, and he was shouting out, "Taxi, taxi, taxi," just taking the mickey, like, you know, he knew he was going to die, he knew we couldn't stop. And all you could hear in the distance was him shouting, like, "Taxi, taxi," and it faded away. It made hard men weep.
Thousands of EastEnders are now bombed out of their homes. Many trek into the countryside and sleep in fields. In Silvertown, close to the Royal London Docks, the local council gathers people together in South Hallsville School.
All those under the viaduct, they were to go to South Hallsville School, where there would be buses to take them to a safe area. Right, so we all makes our way round to this place. Well, we gets there, we're all on the corridors and everything, we're all sitting there waiting to be shifted. We have corned beef sandwiches. Then my mum says, "How do you want your eggs tomorrow?" It was Mrs. Mack. "How do you want your eggs tomorrow? Hard or soft?" You know, jokingly. "Have you got enough sweet coupons? We can share them."
The promised buses fail to arrive. Instead, the corridors and classrooms quickly fill up as hundreds more EastEnders are packed into the school.
That's the lack of experience what they had. You see, you took people down there thinking they was going to be safe. You left them there.
For 2 days and nights, the homeless families wait for transport, just yards from the docks.
They put people, there's a factory there, there's a labs of Paragon, and there's the glassworks there. I mean, aerial photo, I mean, they could look down, they could see there must have been some sort of factory or effort, or wherever it was, you know.
No, son, 10 minutes to 4. There was this vivid flash. I've never seen so many brilliant colours in my life. The doors of the schoolrooms came across and danced over the top of us. Kids screaming, women screaming, we were all fine. All I was thinking of, my dad, was my dad all right? He was shouting out, "You all right, Ada?" And then he's saying, "Maud, are you all right?" That was his stepmother. Yeah, he said, "Where's the old man?" She said, "I don't know." And it seemed eternity, but it must have been about an hour, hour and a half. They came round with these lights. They started digging us and pulling us out.
We was told it was an aerial torpedo or a mine, aerial mine, but when I see it, it sliced one half of it, and all whatever's down, it buried everybody down in it, into the crater. That's where they were. Ghosts were getting them out of the crater.
Then this woman saying to the air raid warden, "Oh, it's Jimmy. That's him with the brown jersey. He's got his scout medals on it." So they've dug everything, or they've got his, oh, no Jimmy. There was so many killed in that bloody school.
On the rescue side of it, those what weren't in complete part, what bits and pieces they could get hold of, which was understandable, they was we used to have rubble baskets, and they was using them baskets for whatever they could, you know, whatever they could find, pick up. There was people there. There was a lot more people than what they said are buried in there. Eventually they realised that the best thing to do was to cover that lot up. And I think they did. Yeah. There's no telling how many people are buried in there even to this day, you know.
Mr. Winston Churchill goes down the London River to inspect the situation in Dockland. Much of the damage has been repaired, all facilities are available, London and its docks are still carrying on.
The Prime Minister's upbeat performance hides intense official concern about morale in the East End.
The Premier with his wife makes a big tour of inspection and encourages everyone by his inspiring presence.
Not everyone is inspired by Churchill's visits or by his oratory.
Well, that old Churchill say, finest hour. Yeah, who gets get your missus and kids and buried and or knocked out? What would you say? You've got finest hour, all right. So, well, I wouldn't be prepared, but a bit more prepared for all this.
Shelters were disgusting. Disgusting, the shelters. The dirt in it, dirt. And the smell and the stink. And people scratching themselves with scabies and all things like that.
After spending days inside inadequate shelters, crowds of Londoners barge their way into the city's underground stations and force the authorities to keep them open all night. Wealthier Londoners find other ways to escape the danger.
The class distinction went on even during the Blitz. So those who had the money or could get away to, you know, out in the country somewhere went. And those who, you know, those who had to stick it out, that was it. That was their, you know, that was their bundle.
London's suburbs suffer far fewer bombs than the East End. For many children there, the war in the air is a source not of fear, but of fun.
I can remember watching dogfights on the way home from school, and I always hoped I would see a dogfight. Now there would be good lads putting their lives at risk, but to a youngster, that really was big stuff. I did many nights stand with my father outside the back door, overlooking this valley where we could see so much, 6 miles across and either side. There were no traffic lights, no shop lights, no background light of any sort, and the whole thing was just pitch black. The activity at night was at times intense. One could hear the German aeroplanes droning, although they were very heavily laden. And the searchlights would try to pick them up, and we were willing these searchlights to do just that. And indeed, if they did pick up a plane, which they did once or twice, it would shine up like a silver light in the searchlights, and they would all switch onto it. Then all hell would let loose, and they would fire these tracers. For a 10-year-old, that was absolutely extraordinary. Now and again, and this is when my father got me back inside, you could hear a whir of the shrapnel, like a and it would hit a roof, and the tire would slide down. And there was a lot of exchange of shrapnel swaps. And a shell base was a prized possession. A shell cap was a rare bird. And I had a good collection.
After 8 days of bombing, the RAF finally hits back. On September the 15th, it savages a big daylight raid. London's embattled inhabitants can at last see their own pilots tearing into the enemy. The dramatic victory forces the Luftwaffe to stop daytime raids on London. The bombers still come by night, but Londoners can now at least go to work in safety, and a new spirit begins to grow.
People never moaned. They never moaned. They got on with what they had to do. They got up and went to work and come home from work and changed into a pair of trousers and an old jumper and went down the shelter and got up from the shelter and went home and changed and went to work.
There was this kind of air of, I'm not going to give in to Hitler. I remember going across Westminster Bridge once, and there was a terrific air raid on. And there was this thing coming down, obviously, quite near, because you would hear the whistling of this bomber, and loads of people threw themselves on the ground, which is an incredible, a sensible thing to do. But some of us didn't. And the attitude was, I'm not going to throw myself on the pavement for Adolf Hitler. That was an attitude, you know, there was this defiance, really.
We had a hell of a scrap over Portland in which about 100 enemy aircraft were engaged. The Messerschmitt 110 whipped up in a stall turn, and I gave him a long burst. It fell over and got on a Messerschmitt 110's tail and sent it down in flames. The bomber crashed in the field. I leveled off. Suddenly there was a blinding flash on my port wing, and I felt a hell of a blow on my left arm, and then blood running down.
Dennis Whistler is a 20-year-old fighter pilot. Since May, he has been in the thick of the air war. Whistler serves at RAF Debden in Essex. When off duty, he mixes with the young women who work on the base.
The first time I met Dennis, I was driving a tractor, and he threw some sand in my engine and stopped it, and I made him start it, and that's the first time I remember seeing him. I said, you stopped it, you start it. So he did. He never really smiled properly because he had 2 teeth that he was ashamed of them. You know, he should have had them taken out. But he had his own way of smiling. They were such a handsome lot. It never occurred to me till much later, and somebody once said, but they were all so handsome. And I thought, yes, so they were. They noticed it, you know, because they were all like that. I mean, there were budding romances all over the place. But we were always supervised, both the girls and the boys. You know, and it was all very proper. I mean, sometimes they held your hand and that was it, you know. Very exciting. Sometimes we went ballroom dancing, all very dignified, I might tell you. It was a chance to get together and talk and, I suppose, flirt, if you like. There were lots of flirtations, weren't there? But we had to be back by 10:15. Sometimes we got an extension to 10:30, which was absolutely fantastic. I suppose, in a way, you were afraid to go beyond the bounds, but some did. In fact, one I do know about that did, and she used to pinch everybody's boyfriends, and we could never understand how she did it until later I found out. A few years later.
Sunday the 29th of September. Did nothing during the day, but there was the usual band in the mess, and when they packed up, I completed the party at the sergeant's mess. Met Edith Heap, and fell in love with her at sight. I rather cut Margaret Cameron, and I'm not so popular with her as I was.
Apparently, he decided that he quite liked me. And he said, are you coming to the squadron dance? Because they were going to be moved to Martlesham, and they were having a sort of special dance. So I said, yes, we've been asked, don't have to worry about it. So when we came off duty, we all flood in, and he's waiting for me. And it just went from there, and I never got near the bar, and we danced, and then he said he wanted a photograph, so we went back to my billet and fetched a photograph. And they went off to Martlesham the next morning, arranged to write to each other every day, and meet when we could, which is what we did.
As Dennis Whistler and Edith Heap are dancing at RAF Debden, Hitler's bombers strike London once again.
I went to sleep on the settee underneath this ironing board, and my mother had got some sugar and rhubarb and was going to make some jam the next morning. And this was, for some reason or other, I knew was near me, this particular canister. At about 2 in the morning, I could hear shouting and people calling and bells and the fire brigade and others. And I suddenly realised I'm looking into the garden and there are no French windows, they've gone. And I could see through into next door. I still couldn't comprehend what had happened because there was a lot of dark. And I thought, I know where there's some sugar. I'll just have I didn't hear the bang, but obviously was awakened by it. And I reached down into this preserving pan to pick up some sugar and picked up a piece of brick and put that in my mouth and spat that out. My father was okay. My mother, who was lying next to him under the table, was hit by the middle wall, which came and just crushed her. I was carried out by a police inspector. I remember saying to the inspector that I knew what all this stuff in the road was called. It was called debris. I felt very proud of the fact that I could use that word and know what it was. Oh yes, he said, that's debris. And we were taken to this house opposite. My father, who went to the hospital and was there told my mother had been killed, he came back to the house and his hair was standing straight up on end, just like it used to in the children's comics, with anyone who'd had a shock. And he said that she had died. And I still didn't really comprehend the immensity of that. So I kept, strange as it may seem, a stiff upper lip. I get more upset thinking about it all these years on than I did at the time. I pretended that nothing had happened. I did not get upset about it, although I knew I should have done. Maybe it would have been better had I done.
Wednesday the 30th of October. Pitters took over for me today and I went to meet Edith as soon as possible. My God, it seems to be the real thing this time.
When we were together, it was quite out of this world, quite literally. He was a delight. He was funny. He was terribly romantic. We used to laugh a lot and act the goat generally. It was something you don't see often. And perhaps war intensified it a bit. And every moment you're together is precious, you see. Women were new in the forces, and they were worried that things would get out of hand and we'd get pregnant and there'd be all sorts of mayhem. And they might have even thought it was bad for the boys, because they did say that they didn't like their pilots to get engaged in things because it destroyed their spontaneousness. They started to worry too much. And I think they were probably right, because they started being careful. And you can't be careful when you're a fighter pilot. You have to go in full throttle and not be worrying about some woman left at base.
Hitler extends his night bombing. Hull, Southampton, Liverpool, Bristol and Cardiff all suffer. On November the 14th, the Luftwaffe strikes Coventry. Teenage fireman Ted Wilson, back from London, faces a firestorm.
The whole place was like bonfire night. Sparks everywhere. And in a short space of time, I lost the eyebrows and the eyelashes, all the hair under my steel helmet, that's all gone. Often I thought about my mum and dad, also my sisters and my brother. I knew that they would be in the Folly Lane tunnels underneath the railway. I know they thought of me and prayed for me during the night. I went to another part of the city to put out a small fire, and we were just clearing up when we heard that the Coventry Cathedral was on fire and it was burning pretty bad. And I felt really, really terrible at that time, because I'd already been on the cathedral twice and put cinders off. And now I knew that the incendiaries had gone in through the roof, the lead, and into the rafters, which were like matchsticks, and there wouldn't be much to save. It was at that moment that I did shed a tear, because the cathedral was my city. He was a symbol of our city. As a child, you was never called a Coventry kid until you'd been up the cathedral spire and had a look round. And the station officer, he said to me about 7:20. Go home if you like, Ted, and see how your folk are.
On his way home, Ted Wilson hears that the tunnels in which his family are sheltering have been struck by bombs.
As I was walking down there towards the tunnels, there was two gentlemen at the other end of the tunnel. One of them, he walked towards me and he put his arms around me and said, "Well done, son." In return, I just turned around and said to him, "Many happy returns of the day, Dad." It was his birthday. And that I'll still never forget. Never forget that moment.
On the Atlantic Ocean, the Royal Navy is now desperately stretched. To help protect the convoys, it presses passenger liners into service and fits them with 19th century guns. 20-year-old Sam Patience is the quartermaster of the Jervis Bay.
The kind of ship I always wanted to be on, a big passenger liner or ex-passenger liner. She was then converted to an armed merchant cruiser. And but to me, to go aboard that and a big liner, be quartermaster, that was it, that was good. We were the protector of the convoy, and our job was to get the convoy safely over to England. We never anticipated we'd run up against a pocket battleship. And when she appeared on the horizon, we didn't even know what it was. And there were all kinds of speculation, blokes looking through the eyesights of the guns. Way on the horizon, you could just see the silhouette of it. And all of a sudden, crash. A full salvo come over, and that was it. We knew then it was a German battleship. Third salvo hit us from about, what, 25,000 yards, must have been 25,000 yards. And our extreme range was only 10,000. Then the order was given for the convoy to scatter. They went to the right, starboard, and we went to the left. We placed ourselves in between the German warship and the convoy. In other words, to protect the convoy, to take all the fire if whatever came over and let the convoy get away. The shells were coming over. You could hear the shells, the whine of them, but you didn't know where they were going to land. First of all, the bridge got hit, or the radio control room. The ship was on fire, and blokes standing beside you were getting killed, burnt alive, and all this and that, and heads blown off. Absolute slaughter. It seems a suicidal mission at the time. I've heard this said to me before, but if we'd have run away, we'd have been cowards. Our object there was to protect that convoy, and that's what we did. We were just getting smashed to bits. And the navigator shouted to us, "Abandon ship, every man for himself." I couldn't swim. I thought, well, I've got to make a decision here. I either go down with the ship or get over the side. And I got hold of a ship's lifebuoy, and I went over the side and got away from the ship before she sank. While I was sliding over the side, I nearly severed all my hand off. All these fingers were hanging off. Didn't notice it at that time. Got in the water and were just paddling about for about an hour and a half. I thought I was strong enough to survive till the morning with the lifebuoy. But I would never have survived all night. It was so cold, it was bitter bloody cold. And all of a sudden, this lifeboat came up, and it was the only boat that got away. I never even knew there was a boat got away. And I said, you know, take us aboard, and there was a bit of a hesitancy about me going aboard. Chuck that bloody lifeboat, lifebelt away. I said, no fear, I'm hanging on to it. But they dragged me aboard, and lifebelt and all, and we were drifting about for about an hour, and then all of a sudden, out of the smoke screen come the Swedish ship, the Sturholm. Magnificent.
Survivors of the armed merchant cruiser Jarvis Bay were brought to a Canadian port by this Swedish steamer, herself one of the convoy attacked by a Nazi warship. These are some of the men who came away from that magnificent sea fight against impossible odds. In the suicidal fight to save the convoy, the sacrifice was not in vain, for 34 ships did escape.
Up until about 18 months ago, I used to be fighting the Germans every night in my bed. I was always being cornered, or they were always trying to get me somewhere or another. For a long time, I'm fighting, effing German bees and all of a sudden. And Rose used to wake me up. Come on, wake up, wake up, wake up. She used to know. She got used to it, you know. But the dreams, you know, they're worn off now. So I must be mellowing with the years.
He said, when I next have some leave, could we spend it together, you see? And I said, yes, if you like. So anyway, we went to Cambridge. And we had dinner and chatted like mad, you know, like you do. And then he said, oh, I've got something I want to say to you. So, and we went up to my bedroom. Now, you never went into a bedroom with a man. It's definitely not allowed. I mean, society didn't allow it. And he sat on the bed, and I sort of leant against the dressing table, and he said, will you marry me? So I said, of course. So he went and got a bottle of champagne. And the man who ran the Red Lion brought it up and never said anything. I was quite surprised. But anyway, so we drank the champagne. And Dennis thought so much of me that he wasn't going to compromise me in any way. And off we went to our respective beds. It showed a great respect, which we had for each other. On the other hand, I could probably have been persuaded. Because if you know that somebody might not come back, are you going to miss the opportunity? Because you never get it again.
Just 6 months earlier, as Hitler's armies stormed through Europe, the world believed that Britain faced certain defeat. But the impossible has happened. The British people have rallied behind a maverick leader whose policy of total defiance appeared almost suicidal.
I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat.
For 200 extraordinary days, the world has seen that Hitler can be resisted and that fear can be overcome.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall never surrender.
He was dictating. And there was a terrific racket going on, bombing outside. And he suddenly said, Miss Holmes, sometimes he called me Miss Sherlock. It was a sort of tease, you know, Sherlock Holmes, you see. He said, are you frightened? Are you sure you're not frightened? And as I've said before, how could one possibly be frightened in the presence of that man? One never was.
Britain cannot win this war alone, but in 1940 she has refused to lose it. As the year closes and the country goes on fighting, still alone, those who have already struggled so hard to frustrate the Nazis must continue to risk their lives.
It was amazing that they managed to fight the way they did, because they must have been suffering from awful exhaustion. Sometimes an aircraft landed and the pilot just fell asleep over his controls. Didn't even taxi back, just stopped, and that was it. So the ground crews had to go and rescue him and bring them back. And they were that tired, and whenever they were off, and they used to just lie about down at dispersal, flat out asleep.
We went over to North Weald this morning and did 3 patrols, 2 of which were at 28,000 feet. I did 5.5 hours, and I'm so tired tonight. I'm going to bed early, but I shall be just as tired tomorrow morning.
In the operations room, Edith Heap and the other WAFs can hear every detail of the battle in the skies above.
There was a tally-ho, and then a lot of noise, really, because they're all going in. And I didn't really hear anything, actually, until somebody said, there's a plane going down, and there's no parachute. And that was all I heard. I thought, oh my God, it's Dennis, and I knew it. Eventually I went back and Bill was waiting for me, and she said, Edith, sorry. Anyway, she said, Dennis is missing. So I said, yes, I know. And they were very kind. And how... Nobody says much, but anyway, I was released from duty that night, and they gave me a fortnight's compassionate leave. I do wish we'd been married, that I do wish. I wouldn't have cared if it was 24 hours or 2 days or 3 weeks or 5 months. I do regret that. But there you go. I think we were very fortunate to meet. We wouldn't perhaps have met if there hadn't been a war. You're only a very small cog in a huge machine, really. But every little cog has to work, doesn't it? However little.